I'm Rob Kirkup, and this is How Haunted, the paranormal podcast where each episode we explore the horrible history and terrifying ghost stories of one of the scariest places on the planet. In episode 86, we conclude our time in the Czech Republic by visiting a place nicknamed the Bone Church for obvious reasons, as the skeletons of up to 70,000 human beings have been used to create all manner of decorative pieces for this church. This is understandably considered by many to be one of the scariest places in the world. But are there any ghosts to be found here? Let's find out together when we ask, just how haunted is the Sedlec ossuary?
Listener discretion is advised, as each episode of How Haunted will feature gruesome tales, horrific happenings, bloody murder, and ghosts. So many ghosts. Listen on if you dare.
The official website of the Sedlec ossuary claims, the Sedlec ossuary, also known as the Church of Bones, is one of the most unusual chapels you will ever see. If you think that you saw everything in your life, think again. And trust me, they're not wrong. This is unquestionably one of the scariest places in the world, and the most visceral reminder imaginable of the inevitability of death. Located beneath the Cemetery Church of All Saints in Sedlec, a suburb of Kutna Hora, approximately 50 miles or 83 kilometres from Prague, the Sedlec ossuary stands as a remarkable Roman Catholic chapel. It is estimated to house the skeletons of 40,000 to 70,000 individuals, whose bones have been meticulously arranged to create intricate decorations and furnishings within the chapel. This eerie, yet fascinating attraction draws in roughly 300,000 visitors annually, making it one of the Czech Republic's most popular tourist destinations. The underground chapel of the Cemetery Church of All Saints was originally part of the Cistercian Abbey here in Sedlec, which was founded in 1142 by Miroslav of Markovich. The church was built in the 14th century, consisting of two chapels being built one on top of the other, and according to the most recent surveys, this was built alongside other outside buildings which made up the entire abbey, as they tried to draw closer to its Jerusalem-inspired design. The chapel's interior is adorned with unique features, including 4 bell-shaped mounts occupying the corners, and an incredible central chandelier crafted entirely from human bones. This intricate piece, which must be seen to be believed, contains at least one of every bone found in the human body. Skull garlands drape the vault, adding to the macabre ambience. Additionally, made entirely from human remains, there are candle holders, chalices, a coat of arms of the House of Schwarzenberg, one of the oldest and wealthiest families in Central Europe. This was complete with every detail from that coat of arms, even a crow plucking an eye out of the severed head of a Turkish soldier. The creator of this grisly artwork, František Rint, also created his own signature, executed in bone near the entrance. Rint being the woodcarver who a little over 150 years ago crafted these astounding works of art, using the skeletal remains of the dead. The history of the ossuary is intertwined with significant events and legends. In 1278, Henry, the abbot of Sedlec Cistercian Abbey, returned from the Holy Land with earth from Golgotha, which was also known as Calvary. This was a site immediately outside Jerusalem's walls where, according to Christianity's 4 canonical Gospels, Jesus was crucified. Since at least the early medieval period, it has been a destination for pilgrimage, so there were soon queues of people just wanting to walk past this jar of holy earth. Some touched it, claiming to be miraculously healed of their ailments. Henry soon realised that this was getting out of hand, simply because he'd chosen to bring home a memento of his time in the Holy Land. So he decided to spread the earth upon the cemetery at Sedlec Abbey, the graveyard which until that moment was no more special or revered than any others in the country. This soil was called the Holy Soil, and therefore when this small sample of earth from the holiest place known to man was sprinkled over the Abbey cemetery, it immediately became a coveted burial ground across Central Europe, especially for those of wealth and standing. Legend would have us believe that some who felt their health failing would travel up to 1,000 miles to ensure that they died while in Sedlec. This was in order to be buried in the most holy of churchyards. They believed that being so close to the soil that Jesus walked upon would guarantee their entry into heaven. Before long, the graveyard was full, and the capacity of the cemetery went from bad to worse when the Black Death, the worst pandemic in human history, swept across Europe between 1346 to 1353, killing as many as 50 million people, which was roughly half the population of Europe at the time. 30,000 victims of the plague were buried right here, and claims of the time are that bodies buried 6 feet below ground could have as many as 3 or 4 bodies on top of them. With so many bodies crammed into this small graveyard, the stench of death pervaded the houses in the local area. People passing the graveyard would often report seeing a strange mist rising from the graves. They said that it was the spirit of the recently deceased rising up to heaven. But in reality, it was human gases escaping from the densely packed mass of decomposing bodies. It wasn't unheard of after a heavy rain for there to be human bones seen jutting out of the ground, the soil having been washed away. With 30,814 bodies officially laid to rest there, and people willing to pay whatever it cost to get them or their loved ones buried in this holiest of places. This will never be proven, what with the passage of time, and the church would not even thank me for suggesting this, but it's been claimed that the offer of money to squeeze one more body into the churchyard led to bribery and church corruption, with priests and gravediggers accepting discreet cash to help grant the last wishes of the newly deceased. But the churchyard was so tightly packed with bodies that in 1399 a plan was hatched to allow more of the dead to be accommodated here. The Gothic cemetery church of All Saints was built by the end of 1400, with an upper level and a lower chapel designated as an ossuary. Although the term ossuary, meaning a depository for the bones of the dead, didn't exist at the time, it's a term which was first used in the 1600s, borrowed from Latin. A series of Roman Catholic crusades between 1419 to 1434 against Bohemian reformers meant even more death in the area. In the spring of 1421, the Hussite troops captured Kutna-Hora and all but destroyed the cathedral and church at Sedlec, after plundering anything of value. The wars took their toll and saw an additional 10,000 men, women and children buried in the cemetery. In 1511, a half-blind monk was given the job of taking the remains from the oldest graves, and then cleaning and stacking the bones in piles within the ossuary. This allowed the church to resell the plots in the cemetery to those desperate enough to be buried in that holy graveyard. Thousands of bodies were dug up and placed into the ossuary, the newly empty graves quickly being replaced with the body of somebody newly dead. The church was bringing in an absolute fortune, making an absolute killing, no pun intended. Those bodies being dug up by the half-blind monk, who it said regained his eyesight following this undertaking for the church, had been laid to rest in what should have been their final resting place, laid to rest here for all eternity. The remains of men, women, children, even tiny babies were dug up daily, put into a sack, and then their bones cleaned and stacked in the ossuary. They were no longer resting in peace. They were resting in pieces. All of these bones were in storage, so a proposal was made to the families of the dead, which told them that the greatest honour that could be bestowed upon their loved ones would be to have their remains used to decorate the holy ossuary. An influential family in the area were paid a fortune for permission to use the bones of their dead relative in this manner, and then others willingly followed suit, then more, and more, and more. And now, there are between 40,000 and 70,000 skeletons used as decoration within this most extraordinary of places. They called it memento mori. The dictionary defines memento mori as an object kept as a reminder of the inevitability of death, such as a skull. It comes from the Latin, which literally means, remember, you have to die. The website of the Sedlec ossuary states, this is associated with the Christian hope of resurrection and remains a valid message for each visitor of this unique place and helps us to understand the symbolism of the place and its decoration. It is not a celebration of death, but it symbolises the equality of people in front of the throne of God. Between 1661 and 1663, extensive renovations were undertaken at the church, addressing much needed repairs, such as the reorganisation of the bones and the replacement of the original Gothic star-shaped vault in the upper chamber. A major renovation of the monastery commenced during the Baroque era in the early 18th century. This endeavour was overseen by world-famous architect Jan Blazel Santini Achel, who transformed the Cathedral of the Assumption of the Church of All Saints within the ossuary into Baroque Gothic masterpieces. Santini is credited with pioneering the skeletal decorations in line with Baroque religious sentiments and aesthetic principles. This features liturgical symbols like cups and monstrances, adorned with garlands of bones. Additionally, Baroque angelic heads and pinnacle-shaped candle holders from 1742 serve as symbols of eternal light. In 1783, the monastery at Sedlec was abolished by the Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II, and the property of the abbey was purchased by the Schwarzenberg family from Orlik nad Wutenval, which is located about 36 miles or 58 kilometres southwest of Prague. Thanks to their patronage, the Sedlec ossuary was maintained. In 1870 they hired a woodcarver, František Rint, to improve and extend the bone church decoration in the ossuary. Rint's work was largely responsible for what we know today as the bone church. The bones used by Rint were disinfected and bleached with chlorinated lime and placed in original patterns. Families should have been appalled at their loved ones' skeletal remains being used in this way, no longer recognisable as once being a person, as every single bone was mixed up and used to make the most macabre art imaginable. In addition to the aforementioned bone chandelier with skull staring outwards at each of the end of the 7 chandelier arms, stationed for an eternal watch. The ossuary displays 2 large bone chalices, 4 Baroque bone candelabras, 6 enormous bone pyramids, 2 bone monstrances, which is a vessel used to display the Eucharistic host, a family crest in bone, and skull candle holders. Festively looping chains of bones are hung throughout like crepe paper at a birthday party. The families were conditioned, dare I say brainwashed, to believe that this was the ultimate honour. An unsubstantiated claim dates from 1890, where one source claims that murderers in the area would take the bodies of their victims here where they could be hidden in plain sight, never going to be found due to the sheer number of human remains being, for want of a better word, processed here on a daily basis. In 1893, a priest was sacked for unknown reasons, but what is known is that he left a very wealthy man being able to buy himself land in a much desired area just outside of Prague. In 1970, marking the centenary of Rint's work, Czech filmmaker Jan Svankmajer was tasked with capturing the essence of the ossuary. What ensued was a frenetic 10-minute film featuring skeletal imagery synchronised with the detached narration of an actual tour guide. However, this version faced suppression by the Czech communist authorities, who deemed it to be subversive. In response, the soundtrack underwent a transformation, replaced by a succinct spoken introduction and a jazz rendition of a French poem. Following the Velvet Revolution of 1989, the original tour guide narration was reinstated, offering a glimpse into the ossuary's eerie allure. The ossuary's significance extends beyond its architectural and historical intrigue. It has been featured in various forms of media, from films like The Black Angel, House of 1000 Corpses, and Blood and Chocolate, to appearances in television shows like The Amazing Race, and Ewan McGregor and Charlie Bowman's Long Way Round, as well as many references in literature. Additionally, it has inspired artworks, such as the cover of the album Nightwork by the Swedish band Diabolical Masquerade. Restoration work has been carried out in recent years at the church. This work began in 2014 and was largely focused on the worrying fact that the church was falling over. The load-bearing capacity of the ground the church is built upon had been exceeded 2.7 times over, which essentially meant the foundations had sunk. Many of the skeletal decorative pieces were dismantled, cleaned and reassembled during this period. Last year, 2023, saw almost 17 million Czech koruna invested into restoring the Sedlec ossuary. This is the equivalent of around £600,000. The total costs calculated from the start of the work in 2014 amount to around 107 million Czech krona. This is a little over £3.6 million. In Kutná Hora, there are several beautiful churches and cathedrals. The entire historic centre of Kutná Hora has been designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The most notable site in Kutná Hora isn't actually the Sedlec ossuary. It is the magnificent Church of St Barbara, with its unique 3-tent roof and fly-in buttresses. And the Cathedral of the Assumption of Our Lady at Sedlec is a must-see, and is within walking distance of the Sedlec ossuary. As the flickering candlelight casts haunting shadows upon the skeletal sculptures and bone-laden chandeliers, it's impossible to not help but feel the weight of centuries past, where every hollow gaze of the more than 40,000 skulls that were recycled and repurposed here tell their own tale of life's fleeting nature. Daring to step foot inside Sedlec ossuary is to journey beyond the veil of the ordinary, into a realm where death and art intertwine. But is this enigmatic building haunted by the spirits of those who were taken from their supposedly eternal slumber and fashioned into decorative pieces to be hung around the church? Are these spirits at rest, as they should be? Or are they very much the opposite, unable to find peace, saddened, angry, and downright pissed off at what has become of their mortal remains? LiveTheWorld.com placed Sedlec ossuary second in their list of the most haunted places in the Czech Republic. Incidentally, Dalaborga Tower, that we covered in the last episode, came top of that list. AmiScript has an article called Haunted Places in the Czech Republic, which includes the Sedlec ossuary. But if you scour the internet, I suspect you'll find not a single ghost story about this frightfully famous church. Yes, countless websites calling it one of the scariest places in the world, and understandably so. But haunted? At first glance, it would seem not. I reached out to the Sedlec ossuary and wrote them a very polite, respectful email to ask if they knew of anyone, staff or visitors or both, who had experienced anything out of the ordinary there. I received a reply a few hours later. Hello, thank you for your interest. However, we truly do not have any ghost stories, nor do we have any knowledge of paranormal activity there. However, you're more than welcome to come and visit. You can purchase a ticket either online or on our website, or in the information centre at Zámemek 279 Kutná Hora, 150 metres from the Sedlec ossuary. Another important information is that it's strictly forbidden to take any photos or videos inside. We look forward to your visit. Kind regards, Katarina Hola, Information Centre. I appreciated the response, but I didn't reply. So I was surprised to receive another response the following day, this time from a different member of staff, and it read as follows. Dear Rob, the Cemetery Church of the All Saints within Ossuary is a functioning Roman Catholic church. It is also a medieval pilgrimage place, where centuries ago crowds of people headed, mainly because it was the location of the Holy Field, i.e., the earth from Jerusalem from the tomb of Jesus. It is therefore by no means a haunted place full of ghosts. The ossuary is not a house of horrors. It is a place with a deep history and memento mori symbolism. Only people who don't understand the historical context are looking for something that isn't really there. Listing this church in your podcast is nonsense. Thank you for your understanding, and if you're interested in the ossuary, we recommend you study the information on our website first. Kind regards, Dagmar Sobotkova, Information Centre. So how haunted? Not very by the look of it. But there are a couple of reasons that lead me to believe that the staff at Sedlec ossuary may know more than they're prepared to let on, as of course it's a working church. In 2006 something happened, which I've seen no evidence of having occurred before or since. On the night of Halloween, a paranormal investigation was permitted at Sedlec ossuary, where one lone ghost hunter was granted access inside this bone-chilling location. Pun fully intended. On the night of Halloween 2006, the presenter of a late-night phone-in show on local radio here in the northeast of England was broadcasting live from the Czech Republic, and those of us listening along heard exactly what happened when he entered one of the scariest places in the world, all alone. Over 4 hours of incredible radio, we heard every moment of his time within the Bone Church. And not only that, but he told some stories to those listening, stories that had been shared with him in the run-up to that night, and stories that I've never seen or heard anywhere else. The presenter told us that in the 1960s, leading churchmen in the Czech Republic, those clearly in the know, claimed it to be the most haunted place on earth. Priests serving in the Cemetery Church of All Saints were attacked by things from the underworld. In 1906, 100 years prior to the radio show being broadcast, one young man studying for the priesthood had his face clawed by something unseen, and the injury was so bad that he lost the sight in one eye. This appears to have happened because he was foolish enough to stay in the church after dark. He told the press in 1906, "I was about to pray when I seemed surrounded by a blackness that knocked me to the ground, and then I felt a pain across my forehead and face. When I awoke, I had lost the sight in my eye." His injuries required over 50 stitches to his neck, face and shoulder. In 1923, a man never even made it into the ossuary before falling foul of the dark spirits that lurk here. He was a friend of a caretaker looking after the property one night. He was in an outbuilding and he was pushed in the back by something. He fell forward onto lit candles, burning his clothes and setting fire to his hair. The one thing that those attacked have in common is that they are the most religious. It's almost like the spirits here are lashing out at those who they hold responsible and feel should pay for the betrayal of the dead. Nobody had been allowed to spend the night in the ossuary for 100 years, until that radio show in 2006, and it appears that nobody has since. 18 long years ago, when I was listening to that show through headphones from the safety of my own home, you could hear the presenter's confidence, from the beginning of the show when he was picked up in Prague by a taxi driver local to the area called Jerry, who warned him it was a bad idea to be going to Sedlec after dark. That confidence slowly drained away. As he got ever closer to his destination, it was clear to us following along on that dark Halloween night that he was concerned and fearful, and understandably so. When inside, he and those listening live heard bangs, footsteps, quiet voices, and the sound of a man getting more and more jittery and worried with each passing moment, and eventually he fled the building 30 minutes earlier than planned. Just in time to find out that his taxi driver had got so scared waiting outside for him that he drove off into the night, leaving him stranded at Sedlec's ossuary. Before we bring our time in the Czech Republic to an end, for now, allow me to read you an email from a listener, Emma from Solihull. Emma got in touch with me just before Christmas of last year, 2023, to tell me of what happened when she went to Sedlec on a day trip from Prague, when she was there on a city break with her partner. She's asked me not to use her full name, as she doesn't want to get the tour guide, who we'll hear about in this story, in any trouble. She sent me this story to be included in my Nightmare Before Christmas special, which was a collection of real-life listener ghost stories, but I wanted to keep it back for this episode, and she was happy for me to do so. Dear Rob, I wanted to tell you what happened when I went on a short break to Prague in October of 2019, and I made the mistake of going on a tour in Kutna Hora to go and see the Bone Church of the Sedlec ossuary. Someone my partner works with had told her that they'd seen it on a documentary and said we had to go and see it, especially in October. When I googled it, I immediately said yes. I love spooky stuff and I couldn't believe I'd never heard of it. I'd have been bitterly disappointed if I'd not known about this until after our time away. We booked to go on a day-long tour from Prague, which would last 7 hours, but that would include the hour to get there and then an hour to get back to Prague at the end. So 5 hours in Kutna Hora in total. And there was plenty of other stuff for the tour guide to show us, including another church and a cathedral. When we got to the Bone Church, I didn't even realise, as it looked so ordinary from the outside. You could pass right by it and have no idea that there's anything unusual about it. But there is. I asked our tour guide if the place was haunted, and he looked uncomfortable with the question. He said quietly to me that the official answer is that it most certainly isn't. But then after a dramatic pause, he said that he knows that those serving the church here have experienced things that they can't explain. He didn't go into any specifics, as he'd been told these first-hand accounts in confidence, but he said that visitors on his tour had seen, heard and felt things. But it's all explained away as being their imagination, considering the scary nature of the building. He said that he'd been to the ossuary on hundreds of occasions, and it didn't seem to faze him at all anymore, although he admitted that it did at first. He told me that he'd seen shadow figures out of the corner of his eye, and he'd heard voices whisper into his ear, although he couldn't work out what they were saying. He admitted that he has no doubt that there is something going on at this place. When we got inside, it was breathtaking. I've never seen anything like it. Our tour guide had told us most of the history of the building when we were stood outside, but now he was explaining how and why the bones were used this way. As he spoke, we were all taking some photos, something that I understand is no longer allowed. Suddenly a little boy in our party, of maybe 8 or 9 years old, fell over and started crying. There was something about the way he fell over which seemed odd. He didn't just topple backwards, he seemed to fall much further back from where he'd been stood. He was taken outside by his mother, and our tour guide followed them to check he was okay. As he left us alone, the rest of our small group began to explore. I found myself alone next to an enormous pyramid of bones, and quietly asked for anybody here to do something. Although I am aware that they would probably not understand English. I took some more photos hoping something weird might appear, maybe some orbs. But nothing happened. It was a shame, but given that we were only there for about 40 minutes in total, I didn't expect it to. We enjoyed the rest of the day on our tour. It was actually fantastic value for money, and I'd highly recommend it, as it only cost the equivalent of about £35 each, including access to everywhere, except one of the churches. And we even got food and drink throughout the day too. On the trip back to Prague, we all found out that something remarkable had actually happened. I got chatting to the lady whose son had ran out of the ossuary in tears. I asked her if he was okay. She said that her son had been a bit frightened by the bones, and had reached out to touch one of them, unsure if they were real. Just as she was about to tell him to stop, he fell backwards. Then he ran out in floods of tears. When they'd got outside, he told her that something had pushed him in the chest. It was at this point that he looked up from playing games on her mobile phone and said, "Yeah, they pushed me." When we arrived back in Prague, we all said our goodbyes and thanked our tour guide, who had been great. Before my partner and I headed off into the early evening to return to our hotel, the tour guide took me to one side. What that lady said about her son going to touch the bones and then was pushed away, "Yeah," I replied, adding that I noticed that he had seemed to fall over in an odd way. "It happens all the time," he replied. You can follow How Haunted on Twitter at @HowHauntedPod, or over on Instagram at HowHauntedPod, where you will see photos galore of the Sedlec ossuary. If you want to get in touch, you can do so by visiting the website at www.how-haunted.com, or you can email me directly at rob@how-haunted.com. If you'd like to support the show, you could sign up to one of 3 Patreon tiers. They start at as little as £1. You can get early ad-free access to episodes, and a monthly bonus episode where I conduct a paranormal investigation, talking you through the history, the ghost stories, and what happened on the night itself. This is interspersed with audio from the ghost hunt. What's more, there is a free 7-day trial at the £3 tier, so you could get access right now to August's special episode, in which you join me at the York Guildhall. And you hear the audio from the night of the ghost hunt, audio that was lost for over a decade. Then there are all of the other special episodes, which include the big Halloween special at the Golden Fleece in York, Bedlam Theatre, Kielder Castle, The Lit and Phil, the Dean Court Hotel, Preston Tower, Gray's Court, Middlethorpe Hall Hotel, the Edinburgh Dungeon, and the 48 hours I spent in the company of a haunted doll. You can also get yourself some exclusive How Haunted merch, including a mug and a t-shirt. Find out more at patreon.com/howhauntedpod. If you'd like to support the show but you aren't a fan of Patreon, why not donate a couple of pounds to help with the admin side of the podcast? You can do this at buymeacoffee.com/howhauntedpod. All the information and links on how you can support the podcast are in this podcast episode description. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please consider leaving a review on your podcast provider of choice. It really does help other people to find How Haunted. Next time out, we celebrate this magical time of the year when here in the UK the nights start drawing in and summer begins to make way for the autumn, as you'll join me on location on a ghost hunt. I'll be accompanied by a group of brave ghost hunters, as in the first of a two-part special, we head into the remote Northumbrian countryside at a 15th century tower, which is believed to be the haunt of the White Lady. But will she make an appearance for us? Let's find out together next episode, when together we ask, just how haunted is Cresswell Peel Tower? Thank you so much for accompanying me for our paranormal adventures once again. Stay safe, and join me next time, when we will once again ask the question, how haunted?